This is the brand new Samsung Galaxy Watch 5, and in this video we will take a first scientific look at the heart rate accuracy, sleep tracking performance, GPS tracking, oxygen saturation measurements, and step counting accuracy of this new watch from Samsung. I also want to briefly discuss the limitations of the new skin temperature sensor that Samsung has included in this new Galaxy Watch. Hello everyone, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Now there are plenty of videos out there already that describe what is new about this Galaxy Watch 5, and you can of course also find those specs on Samsung's website. So I therefore think it's more interesting to in this video focus on a first performance test of the health and sports tracking features of the Galaxy Watch 5. And I want to start off with the heart rate accuracy. This is especially interesting because the previous generation, the Galaxy Watch 4, had some serious issues with the heart rate tracking upon launch. From what I understand, Samsung has made some improvements on the sensors of the new Galaxy Watch 5 compared to the older Galaxy Watch 4, so it might actually be much better now. Honestly though, looking at it, the sensors actually look more or less identical, but the internals could still have improved. So let's see how the Galaxy Watch 5 performs in my initial test for 4 different types of exercises. To test that, I'll compare the heart rate measurements of the Galaxy Watch 5 against the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. We'll start by looking at one of the easiest type of exercises for a watch to track, cycling indoors. Now this involves very little movement or tension on my arms and will therefore produce less noise. Now here we can see an overview of that accuracy for a single ride. Each dot here is a single heart rate measurement with along the horizontal axis the value according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and on the vertical axis the value according to the Watch 5. The closer the points are to the blue line, the better the agreement, and the darker black the color, the more dots there are in a certain area. As you can see, there's a good agreement between the Watch 5 and the ECG chest strap, as almost all points are along the blue line. The correlation, this R value right here, is also really good at 0.98. This correlation value cannot be higher than 1, so 0.98 is quite good. And we can see that in a different perspective if we look at the individual training session. Here you can see my interval spinning session. Along the horizontal axis we have the time and my heart rate is along the vertical axis. In blue I plotted my heart rate according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and in red is my heart rate according to the Watch 5. As you can see, over time the two lines overlap very good to the point where you can basically not see the red line of the Galaxy Watch 5 at all. There are just some tiny deviations, like some small delays in picking up an increase in heart rate right here, but this is basically negligible. However, let's put this into perspective by comparing it to many of the other watches I've tested over the last 2 years. That overview is displayed right here. The correlation value I was talking about before is the metric I will use for this, and that is displayed along the horizontal axis right here. We want that value to be as close to 1 as possible. On the vertical axis, I ordered the watches from worst to best. So the further to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And here I marked the Galaxy Watch 5 in red. As you can see, the Watch 5 is actually among some of the better watches that I tested over the last years, at least based on this limited testing. Now, it's not amongst the absolute best, but it's doing much better than the Galaxy Watch 4 did in my last tests. If we now zoom in and get rid of some of the worst performing watches, we see that even more clearly. The Watch 5 is doing really well, and it seems to be very similar in performance to, for instance, some of the older Huawei watches. As you can see, it also appears to do better than the previous generation, the Galaxy Watch 4, which is more in the middle or upper middle class of watches, as you can see right here. Only some of the Huawei watches and of course Apple watches, which are known for their heart rate accuracy, are still outperforming the new Galaxy Watch 5. But overall, it's doing really good. So this is looking quite good, though these are still initial tests and I will try to release a more complete test in a few days. Next, let's take a brief look at another easy type of exercise for a watch to track, walking outside. A graph of those results is displayed right here. Again, in red is my heart rate tracked by the Watch5, and in blue-green is the reference device. As you can see, the patterns of the two match quite well, though it does seem that the Galaxy Watch 5 misses some of the details in my heart rate. The line is almost a slightly smoother version of the heart rate measured by the ECG chest strap. Overall though, this is not bad at all, but there are these moments like right here, but also right here where the red line is a smoother version of the blue line. Next, let's take a look at a more challenging type of exercise, cycling outside. While cycling outside, watches tend to shift a lot more on the wrist, making accurate heart rate readings much more difficult. Let's see if this influenced the heart rate accuracy of the Galaxy Watch 5. Here we see a similar overview plot to before, but now for biking outside. As you can see, there's still a pretty good agreement between the Galaxy Watch 5 and the ECG chest strap, though there are quite a few more points away from the blue line now. The correlation, that R value, is also a bit lower compared to what we saw before for cycling indoors, with the correlation now being 0.88. However, overall this is still quite good. We can see that in even more detail if we look at the bike ride itself. The red line representing the Watch 5 mostly follows along very nicely with the Polar H10 ECG chest strap. Though again, similar to what we saw for walking, sometimes some of the details appear to be lost. Overall though, this is still looking really good. We can again put this into perspective by looking at many of the other watches I tested over the last years. Similar to before, we use the correlation with the ECG chest strap as the value on the horizontal axis. And the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. As you can see, the Galaxy Watch 5, which is marked here in red, is amongst the better watches when it comes to heart rate tracking. Again though, Apple watches and some Huawei watches are outperforming it still by a bit. However, generally, I'm very satisfied with this performance, and if it turns out that the watch consistently performs this good, I'm really happy. However, so far, these exercises represent easy and medium hard exercises for a watch to track for heart rate. So let's now move on to one of the most difficult exercises for a watch to track, weightlifting. This is much more difficult because of the increased tension on my wrist and on my arm, making it much harder for the watch to get an accurate and clean heart rate signal. However, first a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, I'm planning to start back up with my newsletter and posting more off-the-cuff things on my Instagram and my YouTube Shorts channel. So if you're interested in any of those are linked below. Of course, you would also make me really happy, and it would help my efforts if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. But of course, that's totally up to you. Now, enough self-promotion. Let's look at the performance during weightlifting. Here we can see an overview of that accuracy similar to before. However, now the performance of the Watch 5 is much worse compared to before. There are many points away from the blue line, and the correlation is also much lower at 0.47. And we can see why that is based on the individual training session. Again, in blue-green we see the results of the ECG chest strap, and in red the results of the Galaxy Watch 5. Each time I do a set of exercises, my heart rate increases, as you can see in blue. However, the Galaxy Watch was not able to track this at all. So for weightlifting, the Galaxy Watch 5 does not appear to be very reliable, at least not based on this first set of tests. We can again put this into perspective by comparing it to many of the other watches I've tested in the past, and we can see those results in this overview right here. Again, the more to the top right, the better the consistency with the ECG chest strap. As you can see, relative to other watches, the Watch 5, which is marked in red, is really amongst the worst watches when it comes to heart rate tracking while weightlifting. Still, speaking even more broadly, I would really only use some of the newer Huawei watches and Apple watches for heart rate tracking during weightlifting. Otherwise, I would just advise you use a chest strap, since this is the most reliable way of getting heart rate measurements, as I showed you in a recent video. So, based on my initial testing, I would conclude that the Watch 5 is a good heart rate tracker for cardio exercises. Though this is just an initial result, overall for now I would give the heart rate tracking 4.5 out of 5 stars, since it's really good, though not quite as good as the Apple Watch and some Huawei watches. Next, let's take a look at a feature that Samsung claims is one of the biggest improvements on this new Galaxy Watch, the sleep tracking. Now, I'm not sure if they're referring to the actual sleep stage tracking or just the overall monitoring of your sleep, which also includes the new temperature sensor. However, for this video, I want to see if there's any indication that the sleep stage tracking has improved, since this is also something that Apple is working quite hard on. The first result will just be based on a single night, but I'll release a more complete analysis soon. Like basically all smartwatches, the Galaxy Watch 5 will track your sleep throughout the night and will let you know when it thinks you were in REM sleep, deep sleep, light sleep, and awake. To check if the Galaxy Watch 5 can detect my sleep stages, I'll compare it to an EEG device called the Dream 2 that can actually measure my brain waves and has been shown to be reliable at sleep stage tracking. Here I show an overview of the sleep test results. For getting an overall impression of how well the Watch 5 performs, the Dream 2 should likely be good enough. However, the gold standard would be polysomnography, which you would also like to try on the Watch 5 in the future. Now on top here are the sleep stages as recorded by the EEG device, and on the left the sleep stages recorded by the Watch 5. I wore both the EEG device and the Galaxy Watch to bed for one night, and I will see how close the predictions of the Galaxy Watch 5 are to those of the EEG device. Now each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the Dream 2 was predicted as each sleep stage by the Watch 5. If they perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal should be 100%. Now, first of all, we see that about 61% of what was deep sleep according to the EEG device was also deep sleep according to the Galaxy Watch, which is decent though not great. If deep sleep according to the EEG device was predicted differently by the Galaxy Watch, it was about equally likely it predicted light sleep, REM sleep, or awake time. And we can see that in a different perspective based on the individual night. On top here we have the sleep stages according to the Dream 2 EEG headband, with the clock time along the horizontal axis and the sleep stages on the vertical axis. On the bottom we have a similar plot, but now for the Galaxy Watch. I've highlighted all the EEG recorded deep sleep in purple here. For this first night we can indeed see that some of the deep sleep recorded by the EEG device was also recorded as deep sleep by the Galaxy Watch 5. However, surprisingly, some of the EEG detected deep sleep was actually marked as awake time by the Galaxy Watch, which is quite a surprising difference. So this looks okay-ish, though not great. Light sleep agreement was actually a bit better at close to 70%. And if they did disagree, this was mostly with the Galaxy Watch 5 predicting REM sleep. REM sleep agreement, on the other hand, was by far the worst. Only 32% of what the EEG device predicted as being REM sleep was also predicted as being REM sleep by the Watch 5. More than double that was predicted as being light sleep instead, at about 64%. And we can see that even more clearly based on the individual night as well. Now this is a similar plot to before, but now with the REM sleep as measured by the EEG device marked in red. As you can see, there's a pretty bad agreement between both devices, as only a fraction of what the EEG device marked as REM sleep is also detected as REM sleep by the Galaxy Watch 5. Awake detection actually agreed very well, at about 80% agreement. And most disagreement was with light sleep, which makes sense as light sleep is the closest sleep stage to being awake. However, this good awake time performance is slightly inflated, since I lay in bed mostly awake at the end of my night for quite a while, which is probably quite easy for the watch to detect correctly. To put these results into context, we can compare the performance of the Galaxy Watch 5 to that of other watches. This graph shows an overview of the agreement of different watches with the EEG device. On the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the 4 individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. Now, the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is, and as you can see, the best agreeing devices include different Fitbits, Whoop straps, and the Withings sleep analyzer. If we now plot the Galaxy Watch 5 in the same plot, which is marked in red, we see that its agreement with the EEG device is mediocre. It is really somewhere in the middle if we take into account all watches that I've tested over the last years. And interestingly, one of its closest neighbors is actually the Galaxy Watch 4, the previous generation. So based on that result, I would say that not too much appears to have changed with the Galaxy Watch 5. Overall, the sleep stage tracking of the Galaxy Watch 5 appears to be okay-ish at best. However, based on this limited test, it does appear to be quite good at detecting when you're awake and when you're asleep. This does mean you could potentially use it quite well for detecting your total time in bed and your total time asleep. Therefore, overall, I'd preliminarily give the sleep stage tracking of the Galaxy Watch 5 2.5 out of 5 stars. Next, let's take a brief look at the GPS tracking accuracy of the Galaxy Watch. Now, I will show a more complete test in a few days, but for now, let's take a look at how well the GPS tracking stuck to the roads I rode on while cycling. Here you can see one bike ride I tracked with the Galaxy Watch 5, and it's important to note that I was not connected to my phone, so it really had to use the GPS of the watch itself. First of all, we can see based on the green marker that the GPS signal was acquired quite quickly, as the green marker is close to the point where I started my ride from. And if we look at the track itself, we can see that it's mostly quite close to the roads that are indicated in Google Maps, which is good since I of course cycled along these roads. So this is generally looking quite good, I would say. Though there are some moments where it struggled, like here for instance, where the watch seems to have lost the signal for a bit and drew a straight line for a while. And yes, that straight line ended at McDonald's, which I might or might not have gotten some takeout from. After that though, we do see that there's some more deviation of the signal away from the main roads, and the line even goes through some buildings sometimes, so here it looks a bit more noisy now. However, generally the GPS tracking appears to be quite okay, though not the best I've ever seen. Therefore, overall, I'd very preliminarily give the GPS tracking of the Galaxy Watch 5 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, moving on, we saw before that the optical heart rate sensor of the Galaxy Watch 5 is pretty good at heart rate tracking. However, how does it perform at measuring something different, namely your oxygen saturation, or in other words, SpO2? Where heart rate is usually recorded using green light, red and infrared light are generally used to track oxygen saturation. To test the oxygen saturation measurements, I want to see if the Galaxy Watch 5 ever detects a low oxygen saturation when it's not supposed to. And I did this by taking measurements with the watch when I knew that my SpO2 was at normal levels. To test that, for now, I took 13 SpO2 measurements with the Galaxy Watch 5. And in between, I reattached the watch to my wrist several times and also switched the measurement between my right and left arms. At the same time, I also recorded my oxygen saturation with a dedicated finger pulse oximeter. Now at ground level, my oxygen saturation should be within my normal range, which is generally between 97 and 100% and should not fall below roughly 95%. However, when the effective oxygen concentration is much lower, as it is for instance in a low pressure environment, my oxygen saturation can drop below 90%. Here are the measurements I took at ground level. On the left are 30 measurements taken with the Galaxy Watch 5, and on the right the matching measurements taken with the finger pulse oximeter. And on the vertical axis are the SpO2 values. As you can see, the Galaxy Watch 5 generally recorded somewhat lower SpO2 values than the finger pulse oximeter. I actually found that most of the time the Galaxy Watch 5 would record SpO2 values of around 95 or 96%, which is relatively low for me. We can see that even more clearly if we display these results as a histogram. In this case, the SpO2 values are along the horizontal axis, and the larger the bar, the more often this value was recorded. As you can see, the Galaxy Watch 5, which is displayed in red, mostly recorded lower values than the finger pulse oximeter, displayed in blue-green. And the Galaxy Watch 1 even recorded a value of 94%, which is low. So this is not looking that great, but it's difficult to make any final judgments of the SpO2 accuracy of the Galaxy Watch 5. All we can say is that it does seem to record relatively low SpO2 values, though not extremely low. Therefore, overall, based on the limited testing I've done so far, I'd give the SpO2 measurements of the Galaxy Watch 5 3 out of 5 stars. The next thing I tested on the Galaxy Watch 5 is the step counting accuracy. To test the step counting accuracy, I went out and I took exactly 4,000 steps with the Galaxy Watch 5. Now, I do not like counting 4,000 steps in my head, which is why I counted each step manually using this tally counter. Let's take a look at those results. I actually counted my steps in 4 segments of 1,000 steps, switching the tally counter between my left and right hand, which is what the right and left labels refer to here. And I wore the Galaxy Watch 5 on my left arm. Now these numbers right here are the steps counted for each of the 4 segments by the Watch 5. As you can see, it was pretty good at counting my steps, and at worst it was 12 steps off, which is not bad at all. In total, it counted 3,992 steps, which is really close to the actual 4,000 steps I took, and I would say that this is even within the margin of error of mistakes I could have made while counting. To put that into perspective, here are the steps counted by the Galaxy Watch 4 I wore at the same time. As you can see, the step counting by the Watch 4 seems to be a bit worse than what we saw for the Watch 5, since it tended to undercount my steps consistently. So though this test is limited, the Watch 5 does at least at first glance appear to do slightly better than the Watch 4. Now, it's difficult to make any definitive conclusions based on just this test, but the step counting of the Galaxy Watch 5 appears to be really good. Though we cannot make definitive conclusions, I preliminarily give the step counting accuracy 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now, even though the sensor is already included, the skin temperature functionality is not yet available on the Galaxy Watch 5. So even though I cannot test it, I did want to briefly address this in the video. Samsung says that this feature will be mostly used for sleep tracking. However, I do think that the applications of what it might be used for are somewhat limited. The most obvious way to use it is not to track the temperature over just a single night, but to track patterns over many days or search for nights where there's a big deviation. If there's a big increase in your temperature, for instance, this means you might have a fever, and women could also potentially track their cycle and fertility via the skin temperature sensor. However, the utility I'm still a bit skeptical of is the use of tracking temperature changes throughout the night. Let me show you why that is by comparing the skin temperature measurements taken with the Whoop Strap 4.0 during the night to my core body temperature measurements. For tracking my core body temperature during the night, I use the MyTemp sensor from Purple Axis, which takes the form of a small, easy-to-follow capsule that measures my core body temperature. The sensor is normally used by athletes to continually measure their temperature. That data can, for instance, be used for monitoring the safety and the performance of an athlete. However, I used it to track my core body temperature during sleep. Here you can see a graph of my core body temperature throughout one night plotted in green and my skin temperature according to the Whoop strap in black, with degrees Fahrenheit on the right for my American friends and degrees Celsius for most of the rest of the world on the left. As you can see during this night, my core body temperature dropped during the first part of the night, after which it slowly rose again as I got closer to the point of waking up. Interestingly, my skin temperature does not follow the same pattern. It actually rose as I got under the covers and kept slowly rising throughout the night with some dips and some peaks. And this is more or less the general pattern I observe for all the nights, where the graph of my core body temperature shows sort of a hammock-like shape, whereas my skin temperature shows a slow but noisy increase. Now, this probably doesn't mean that the Whoop strap does not measure the correct temperature. It just shows you that core body temperature and skin temperature are very different things. Skin temperature is influenced much more by the environment, and for instance by whether or not a blanket is covering me. This is why I think the use of the temperature sensor is limited when it comes to tracking my temperature throughout the night. So, should you buy the Galaxy Watch 5, and is it worth the upgrade compared to the Galaxy Watch 4? Well, overall, the Galaxy Watch 5 is quite a nice device to use and it has many good features. However, it's not too different from the Galaxy Watch 4 in many respects. When it comes to health tracking, I'm pleasantly surprised by the heart rate tracking, at least based on the limited test I was able to do so far, which seems to me like the main improvement of the watch from that perspective. The sleep stage tracking, on the other hand, does not show any signs that it has improved. I think that the temperature sensor is a nice additional feature, though the use cases for it will be somewhat limited. Still, I think that the Galaxy Watch 5 is quite a nice smartwatch overall, and with the apparent improvements in heart rate tracking, it does look promising. I'll be doing more tests of the Galaxy Watch 5 over the next few days, and I'll release my full review after those are done, so stay tuned for that video. If you want to be notified, subscribe to the channel and press that bell icon. If you want to buy the Galaxy Watch 5, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, and at the same time support the channel, there are affiliate links in the description below that do not cost you any extra. If your focus is purely on heart rate tracking, I would recommend an Apple Watch for iOS, and I can also recommend the Huawei Watch GT3 series or Huawei Watch Fit 2 on Android, and you can find those videos right here. Of course, the best heart rate tracker is still an ECG chest strap under most circumstances. I'll also link the recent reviews I did on the Whoop strap right here. Now, I hope this video provided you with some value. Thank you so much for watching and catch you in the next video.